Guys, what started off as like a normal pre and post testing video, which this video very much is, has now completely shifted to arguably the most busted thing we have ever seen inside of Destiny. You see, with the most recent changes with Act 2 of Revenant, we have had a host of roaming supers get buffs, and those are the supers we're going to be going over today. Now, the main thing that was changed about these supers was that you would get them more frequently, and like 3 times as frequently. But Bungie also noticed that these supers were also very weak against champions, so they've gone in here and actually given increases anywhere between 30 and 55% to each one of the roaming supers we're going to be going over. Now keep in mind, this excludes things like Song of Flame and any other one-off super, that being a single input super like Nova Bomb, Chaos Reach, Code of the Missile, etc. However, one super in particular is doing way more damage than it's supposed to. Sentinel, for some unknown reason, is doing 172% more damage than what it was doing previously. And originally we thought this was just against champions. We were like, all right, it can melt champions really fast now. Hot damn. Turns out though, guys, it appears this is against bosses as well. Matter of fact, here on Greg, look how much damage we are doing with our Sentinel supers. Keep in mind, Glacial Quake, which has been the king for so long when it comes to total damage for supers, is now being beat out by literally Sentinel Shield. Matter of fact, our most recent damage test of this, of Glacial Quake with Star Eaters on our exotic class item, was dealing over 2.5 million damage. However, our Sentinel Shield with Syntheseps was doing 2.8 million damage. Now keep in mind, guys, you don't even need Syntheseps. Even a base Sentinel by itself is doing damn near 2 million damage. That is incredible, and it is beyond any other super in the game currently. And by the way, big shout out to Duck for being the first one to point it out, because originally I thought this was only applicable to champions, but again, for Sentinel in particular is also working with bosses. Now, interestingly enough, we also had another super that got that 170% increase in damage, that being Fist of Havoc. However, that one does not apply to bosses. That 170% is only against champions. Now, with all that being said though, today we're going to be going through each of these supers. We're going to show how they've changed in terms of super regeneration, as well as what their damage looks like against champions, and breaking down those damage values. Now, because Sentinel is actually doing increased damage against bosses, we have decided to retest literally every super and exotic combination in the game. We just finished up Titans today. We're going to be hitting Warlocks and Hunters tomorrow, and we'll have a super cut on that coming this weekend. With that being said though, guys, timestamps down below, and let's take a look at how our supers have changed pre versus post. Now let's start with regeneration rates. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we actually did all of our testing here at 100 intellect, and we tested just at the Cistern Lost sector where Coral is killing the ads that spawn. Another thing to note is that all of these roaming supers have a base recharge rate of 9 minutes and 16 seconds. Now, the only super that was affected here that is not within that tier is Burning Maul, which sits at 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, because of that, all of these tests and the super regeneration rates were very close. So we're not going to show every single test, as it's essentially just going to repeat the same thing every single time. But in terms of our pre-testing, for all of our supers, we recorded ourselves killing the ads, and by the time we are done, our super bar would be just under 50% full. And to fill up the rest, we would then have to shoot Coral and the additional ads that spawn for roughly a minute. Now again, that is pre-Act 2, before these roaming super changes. Now though, post-update, you can see that the regeneration rate has definitely improved, as by the time we're finished killing all of the ads around Coral, we have about 3/4 of our super bar filled. And we only need to shoot Coral for about 10 seconds to fill up the rest of our super meter. And again, for all the tests we did, we're roughly at the same spot by the time we got done shooting all the ads. Now, something super interesting we need to note is that Bungie mentioned that this would not work with Celestial Nighthawk when using Golden Gun. Currently, right now, it works. And we actually thought the downtime maintenance this past week from Bungie was addressing this, but they haven't. And you can see it right here, guys. We can actually regenerate our super faster with Celestial Nighthawk, as part of its exotic perk reads that precision final blows reduce the cooldown of your super. Now, in our testing with this within a lost sector, we were able to get our super completely back by the time we killed all the ads. To take this a step further, Sneaky Beaver has actually posted some clips over on Twitter, and it's insane what you can pull off with Celestial and Outbreak perfected. Because of the Siva nanites from Outbreak, you can literally just lay into the boss and just look how quickly he's getting his super back. And again, Bungie specifically stated in the patch notes that Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun was not supposed to have this effect, but for the time being, it does. Which means if you are a Golden Gun fan and you like rocking Celestial Celestial Nighthawk. Now is your time. And as far as like the best weapons to pair, Outbreak Perfected is really good. Anything that does like multiple ticks of damage, but you can even further pair this with something like Bad Juju if you're running things like Grandmaster Nightfalls. As Bad Juju has been reworked this season, it's substantially more lethal and it nets you super energy, which is a match made in heaven here for Celestial Nighthawk users. Now, considering that Celestial Nighthawk and Golden Gun does in fact have the increased regeneration rates for a super, this immediately made us think to try out Pyrogale Gauntlets, since Bungie also noted that Pyrogale with Parting Maul would be excluded from the increased super regeneration. Now, in our pre and post testing for this, it seemed to be working as intended from the patch notes, as our super gains looked just like they did during the pre-testing, giving us under half of our super bar from killing the ads in this low sector. Now, keep in mind, if you want to run Pyrogale, you can always just use a different exotic. Then when your super energy is full, if the content allows you to, you can then swap to Pyrogale. And the same can be done for Celestial Nighthawk if or when its super regeneration will be fixed. Keep in mind though, certain content doesn't allow you to do this, whether it's locked loadouts or things like comp, of course, which depletes your abilities when swapping these exotics. What I will say, guys, is that over the past few days, I have been running around inside of things like GMs, as well as Contest of Elders, rocking roaming supers that I haven't used ever. As a matter of fact, for the longest time, because of the cooldown of these roaming supers, I normally would just use them as like a panic button. If I found myself in a situation where I was about to get killed, then I would pop my super, or if I needed to go get a res for my teammate. But with our most recent build battle that we just did with this new sandbox, there is a play to be made with roaming supers. And originally when I read the TWAB last week about these upcoming changes, I thought this would take away from the PvE experience. But guys, I am having so much fun. I'm literally popping things like Arc Strider and Raiden Flux, which yes, we're going to be talking about Raiden Flux in just a moment, but I'm running things like Grandmaster Nightfalls solo and wrecking things. I'm able to pop a Behemoth Titan back to back. And the power fantasy here is no lie, the craziest it has ever been. And in some ways, this has just made Prismatic even better because it has boosted these roaming supers that are present on Prismatic. All I can say, guys, is that this list of roaming supers, please give it a go. Try it out. And we'll have a list of exotics here soon that really benefit each one of these supers. It's a good chance that a build battle is already rolling out that's incorporating some of these changes. But for the time being, feel free to try out any of these supers inside of in-game content and you'll have a blast. Now, moving on to our next change, the damage increase against champions. Now, for this testing, we wanted to keep it as one-to-one as possible. So we actually did our testing against a champion on the moon in free roam, which is in this area right here, the teleporter for Garden of Salvation. But the main reason why we chose this champion is because there's no power level on the moon. So we didn't need to worry about power level differences if we were in an expert lost sector or a nightfall. Now, starting out with our hunters, Arc Staff got a 30% damage increase, seeing our light attack going from 32,048 to 41,662. Our heavy attack damage also got the same 30% increase, going from 46,900 to 60,969. Now, for my Arc Staff users that incorporate the light attack, heavy attack combo, where you do the Palm Blast, that also got a 30% increase, going from 109,431 to 142,261. Now, I know the range was between 30 and 55%, and some of my hunters may be let down that it wasn't higher than the 30%. But let me just say, guys, at least in my experience, Arc Strider feels really good. And a lot of that has to do with Raiden Flux. Again, more on that exotic in just a moment. Now, next up, we have Golden Gun. This is where we run into our first difference from the patch notes, because neither the 3-shot Golden Gun or our 6-shot Golden Gun got a damage increase. For our 6-shot Golden, we were dealing 33,854 pre-updates. And in the current sandbox, we're still doing the same amount of damage. The same thing is for our 3-shot variants. Pre, it dealt 73,351, and post, we're dealing the same damage here. Even the 2nd shot that gets the increase in damage was doing 106,946 damage in both pre and post testing. Now, Golden Gun is already a pretty solid super as is, but still, Bungie did state that it was going to get a 30 to 50% increase in damage against champions. It's kind of a weird situation because, yes, in one hand, it's like, Bungie, why didn't you buff my Golden Gun? On the other hand, though, Celestial Nighthawk is working with that increased super regeneration, and now I feel like we're in this weird situation where it's like, okay, which one would you rather? I'll leave that up to my hunter mains to decide. Next up, though, we have Spectral Blades. This one got a very much needed damage buff. It actually got 55.5% increase in damage, both in its light attack and heavy attack against champions. Now, its light attack here went from 18,027 damage pre to 28,042 damage post, and its heavy attack went from 26,381 to 41,037 damage post. Keep in mind, when Revenant first launched, Spectral Blades already received a base 20% increase in damage inside of PvE. Now, have they done anything about fixing its hit registration? No. It's poopy, man. Ain't no way around it, dude. That is the worst hit registration in the entire game. Bungie! No lie though, if Bungie actually does come out here and made it easier for those consecutive hits to land, we might be cooking with something here. And considering that the Spectral Blades heavy attack intrinsically has weakened, kind of like the idea of one day saying, hey, hunters, put away your tethers. It's time to rock Spectral Blades, baby. Now, last for our hunters, we have Silk Strike. Now, pre-updates, its light attack was doing 59,276 damage. In post, it is now doing 77,058 damage, giving us a 30% increase in damage. Now, as far as its heavy attack, that being its spin attack, it also got a 30% increase, going from 18,239 to 23,711. This is a really nice buff here, guys, to an already really good super. Keep in mind, at one time, Silk Strike and Star Eater was putting out the most damage out of all of our supers. It's fallen back a bit for sure now, but in terms of just running Grandmaster Nightfalls and clearing their champions, this is a very nice buff. Next up, we have our Titans. We're going to start with Fist of Havoc. Its slam attack has been increased by 30%, going from 32,135 to now 41,508. Now, as far as its light attack goes, this got a massive increase in damage, and I'm really not sure what happened here. Pre was doing 17,805. Now it's doing a whopping 48,184 damage. Guys, this is a whopping 170% increase in our super damage, which is way higher than what it was supposed to be. And interestingly enough, the same thing also applies to Sentinel Shield. Its line attack went from 17,805 damage to 48,495 damage, which is roughly a 172% increase in damage. Now, as for the shield throw for Sentinel, that did stay normal. That went from 17,924 damage to 23,301 damage, giving us that 30% increase. It's really interesting though that the light attacks here in our melees got such a substantial increase, and no lie, selfishly, I kind of hope Bungie just lets this fly. In the meantime, fellas, if you pop these supers, use those light attacks. Next, we have Hammer of Soul. This went from 20,152 damage to 30,192 damage, giving us a 50% increase in damage, which is very nice to see. Next, we have Burning Maw. Now, everything across the board for Burning Maw seems to have received a 52% increase in damage. First, with its spin attack, pre was doing 3,996 damage each hit. Post is now dealing 6,080 damage per spin hit. Then for its slam attack, pre we were doing 12,485 damage plus 9,988 damage. And then we would spawn that Cyclone, which would hit for 8,999 damage. Now post, this is jumped up to 18,999 damage plus 15,199 damage, with the Cyclone being increased to 1,368 damage. Again, all of this across the board being a 52% increase overall, which is very nice. Next, we have Glacial Quake. Now, Glacial Quake really didn't need all that much help when it comes to doing damage, but hell, I'll take it. Pre, its light attack was hitting for 58,364 damage plus the freezing burst, which does 6,953 damage. Now, post, its light attack does 75,873 damage, with the freezing burst dealing 9,038, giving us around a 30% increase in damage overall. Now, most people don't use the light attack, and I get it. We're going for the slams, and that's where the most damage comes from. Now, this was kind of a hard one to test because the ideal damage rotation for Glacial Quake is just to sit there and hit your heavy attack over and over and stack up as many stasis crystals as possible and then have them all shatter. In our testing right here, when slamming to freeze an enemy and then you follow up with a light attack melee, you see that the pre did 58,364 damage plus 19,312. Post though, you'll notice that it does 75,873 damage, that being the light attack damage itself, but the 19,312 stays the same. It does not get an increase. Only the melee from the super gets that increase. Now, I'm not going to say that my testing here is flawless. Heavy attacks from Glacial Quake are really, really hard to narrow down, and that's why we use things like Greg, as that allows us to walk away with the game literally recording how much damage we did to the boss itself. Champions are harder to gauge, especially considering so much is variable. Now, lastly, for our Titans, we have Blade Fury. Now, pre, our light attack for Blade Fury was doing 30,778 damage, and post, that light attack is now dealing 40,011 damage, giving us a 30% increase. Now, our suspend attack pre-update was dealing 28,358 damage, and post, this went up to 36,504, which is only about a 28.7% increase, but it's very likely there's some rounding going on here. Now, with Blade Fury, you can also suspend the targets and then hit them with a light attack, which deals increased damage. But for whatever reason, in our post testing, we could not get the bonus damage to work against this champion. You see here that pre, we were doing 38,472 damage, but post, it's only doing the base light attack damage of 40,011. Now we did test this against a champion in an expert loss sector, and it was in fact dealing increased damage when suspended and then hitting for a line attack. But for whatever reason, it was not working against this specific champion on the moon. Now finally, we are on to our warlocks. Let's start with Stormtrance, aka Tickle Fingers. Now we're going to start with that landfall damage that erupts under you when you cast your super. Now pre-damage, we were doing 31,632. Post, this has been increased to 39,358. Now this is roughly a 24.4% increase in damage. Now the Tickle Finger attack itself, pre-update, was dealing 4,340 and would ramp up to 6,148 damage, which is part of the intensity over time that this super gains when holding down your Tickle Fingers. Now in this current sandbox, this has been increased quite a bit. We start out at 6,172 damage, and this ramps up to 9,181 damage. Fellas, this is a 42.2% increase in damage. For the love of God, please come by our stream and somebody drop me a build battle submission for a Crown Tempest Warlock. Now next we have Daybreak. Pre-update, we were dealing 20,030 damage plus 14,263 damage. Now post-update, this has been increased by 30%, going to 26,039 damage plus 18,541. Next on the list, we have Nova Warp. Pre-update, we were doing 33,698 damage with our line attack. Post-update though, we're now dealing 43,787 damage, which is a 30% increase. Now, a small note here, guys, I completely forgot about the charge attack. I know, and you guys call me a Warlock main. Do you need any more proof than that? Now, granted, since the 30% increase was applied there to our light attack, I would assume it applies to our heavy attack. And keep in mind, guys, this is on top of the buffs that Nova Warp has been getting consistently inside of PvE. Not really sure if this is going to move the needle all that much, but I'm willing to give it a go. Now, last up for our roaming supers here, we have Winter's Wrath. Now, pre-update, our shatter attack damage was dealing 44,783 damage plus 19,312 damage from our shatter, along with an extra 1,792 damage, giving us a total of 65,887 damage. Now, post, our initial attack deals 67,852 damage, which is a 51% increase over pre, but our shatter damage remains the same though at 19,312. And we also had 2 extra damage instances where it was doing 2,715 damage and 1,207. Now this does give us a total of 91,086 damage, which is a whopping 38.2% increase over base. Again though, this is taking into account all our damage numbers, including the shatter, which of course did not get that increase in damage. Now that is how our roaming supers have changed, pre versus post. But there are a few additional changes that we wanted to include here, since they are super related. Storm's Edge has been moved from a tier 3 super to a tier 1 super, which takes its super cooldown from a base of 8 minutes and 20 seconds to 10 minutes and 25 seconds, making it the longest cooldown super in the entire game. Bungie also did things like reduce the height of its damage impulse from 5 meters to 3.75 meters, as well as its damage resistance being reduced from 3% down to 45%. Now, testing this in game with Bygones. Pre-update, we were doing 18 damage per shot against a target in the super, but now post, Bygones is dealing 21 damage per shot against a target in Storm's Edge. Now, to be honest, guys, this is more of a subjective thing, and I need to just go play more PvP to see how effective Storm's Edge actually is. What I was really surprised about was last week when we were first reading about these changes, how many people in the comments section, as well as our Twitch chat, were shouting hallelujah about this change. I personally think that the cooldown is a bit too harsh. 10 minutes and 25 seconds, fellas. Hot damn it. Look, it's a good super, man, but it ain't that good. Like, it must be a lot more difficult to deal with that super on console. At least here on PC, I'd rather deal with a Storm Edge user all day long versus someone who's good with a golden gun, but that's just me. Now, finally, we have 2 exotic armor changes which relate to our supers. Those being Raiden Flux and Ballidorse Wrathweavers. Now, for these tests, we did them at Carl, since they were just blanket buffs to the exotics. But you, of course, could use these against champions in combination with the damage increase that we went over. But first up with Raiden Flux. Bungie's increased the bonus super damage per stack from 14% to 20%, which now maxes out its damage at 70% over its 50% that it would offer before. Now, for those that are not familiar with this exotic, we actually have a build battle coming out on it, but it comes with the exotic perk Synapse Junction, where quick successive attacks with Arc Staff increases its damage output as well as its duration. Essentially though, hits with your Arc Staff will grant you a stack of Synapse Junction, which lasts for 5 seconds and will max out at 3 stacks. Now, pre-damage values here at Carl, our light attack base is doing 42,731 damage. Now, at times 1 Synapse, this would increase by 14%, bumping up our damage to 48,499. And then at pre times 3, this would jump up to 46% at 62,478 damage. But you know, if you're like, Cross, why is this different from what Bungie said in their patch notes? Listen, I know, math ain't mathin', but we rolling, baby. Now, posts at times 1, we see a 20% increase being added here, hitting at 51,277 damage. And then we actually max out at times 3 of our light attack at 73,838 damage, which is a 72.8% over our base line attack. Now, these percentages were the same across our testing for all of our super attack variations. For instance, our heavy attack at base pre-update was dealing 62,532 damage. At times 1, it was dealing 70,973 damage, and at times 3, it was dealing 91,431. Post though, our times 1 actually jumps up to 75,039 damage for a heavy attack, and at times 3, it jumps up to a whopping 108,056 damage. Now again, if you do your line attack plus heavy attack combo, which is the most damage you can get out here, pre-update we were doing 231,370 damage, and then at times 3 synapse, this would crank up to 338,294 damage. But post-update in the current sandbox, that has been increased also by 72.8%, kicking up our damage to 399,806 damage, which is incredibly impressive, guys. Raiden Flux is worth using, and I highly advise my Arc Striders to give it a go. Now finally, we have our Ballidorse Wrathweavers. Bungie has increased the bonus shatter damage from 100% to now 150%. The increased shatter damage now shows as a yellow number to now aid with the visibility of the perk. They've also fixed an issue where enemies were inconsistently getting the boosted shatter damage at higher frame rates. Now, one thing to note is we also did this testing with Whisper of Fissures, but it doesn't change our damage that much, only tacking on about an extra 1,000 damage. Now, first, let's just start with what our base super does before we get into Ballidorse. At base, our super is dealing 59,710 damage, plus the 19,312 shatter damage, plus 1,207, plus 2,389, for a total of 82,618. Now, pre-update with Ballidorse, this would increase our damage to 71,652, plus 46,349, plus 1,448, plus 2,867, for a total of 122,316. Now, post-update with Ballidorse equipped, and keep in mind, our base super here from Shadebinder and Winter's Wrath is still the same, but with Ballidorse now in the current sandbox, this really hasn't increased all that much. We still have 71,652. Our shatter damage has gone up to 57,936, plus the 1,448 and 2,867, for a total of 133,903. As you see here, guys, and again, that was what was stated in the patch notes, it's the shatter damage that got this increase. Personally, I don't really feel like it moves the needle all that much, but it is extra damage. So guys, those are our pre versus post for supers. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and if you happen to be tackling any in-game content, whether it's Grandmaster Nightfalls, dungeons, Contest of Elders, Tomb of Elders, all I can say is that our roaming supers, or most of them, are feeling really, really good right now. For too long, many of us have not relied on any of these, but with the increase in damage here against champions, the regeneration being massively overhauled, netting us more supers than ever before, now is the time to finally start using these in in-game PvE. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.